They didn't come to my wedding, but when they saw my wife's $25,000 ring on Instagram, my mom suddenly texted, "We want to meet her now." My father added, "Tell her to dress nicely. First impressions matter." When they arrived at our house, my wife smiled politely, opened the door, and gave them an answer. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. And hit hype to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where viewers are joining from. The knock came at exactly 3 o'clock. Sharp, deliberate, precise in a way they had never managed for anything that actually mattered to me. I stood in the hallway of our home, my pulse slamming against my ribs, every heartbeat echoing in the quiet space between my wife and me. She moved toward the door with that effortless grace she always had, a kind of calm elegance that made her seem almost weightless. She wasn't dressed to impress them. She didn't need to. A cream silk blouse and tailored charcoal pants, her dark hair pulled into a loose twist at the nape of her neck. The $25,000 ring shimmered on her finger like a small sun, catching flashes of gold in the afternoon light. Before her hand reached for the doorknob, she glanced over her shoulder at me. Not nervous, not uncertain, just a silent question in her eyes. "Are you ready for this?" I nodded. A lie, maybe, but one I needed to tell myself, because readiness didn't matter. This confrontation was happening, whether my heart was steady or shaking. My wife's hand closed around the doorknob, and the world seemed to slow. I felt sweat bead on my palms, the air in the hallway turning thick, almost viscous. The memory of my wedding day, of waiting, watching the door, telling myself, they'll come, they have to come, pierced through me like a shard of glass. They hadn't come then, but they were here now, not because they cared about me, but because they'd seen the ring, the house, the car, the life I built without them. The door opened, and there they were. My parents stood on our porch as if they were posing for a magazine spread. My mother wore a pale blue designer dress she'd posted about online just last week, with jewelry chosen carefully. Not too flashy, but curated to say we are people of taste. My father wore an expensive tailored suit despite the warm weather, his watch glinting in the sun, his expression arranged into that polished, public-facing smile he used for business dinners and charity galas. They looked like they'd dressed not to meet their son, but to be seen meeting him. My wife, however, stood like a wall between their intentions and our home. She didn't bow her head. She didn't offer a greeting. She simply stood there, serene, calm, perfectly still, like a queen assessing uninvited guests. Her posture said everything. You will not enter this house as if you deserve to. My parents smiled even wider, oblivious to the shift in power. My mother lifted her arms for a hug she assumed would be welcomed. My father nodded at my wife as if she were a receptionist clearing his appointment, but my wife didn't move, not an inch. The silence thickened, long enough to become uncomfortable, long enough for even them to sense that something was wrong. Then my wife spoke. Her voice was smooth as polished stone, each word deliberate, carrying a weight that made the space around us feel suddenly smaller. "Before you come into our home," she said, "I need you to understand something." My mother's smile wavered. My father's eyebrows twitched upward. "I know exactly who you are," my wife continued, her tone calm but unyielding. "What you've done, and why you're here." A gust of warm wind swept across the porch, rustling the leaves of the oak tree beside our walkway like nature itself was leaning in to listen. "And if you step through this door," she said quietly, "you will be held accountable for every piece of it." Her words didn't rise or sharpen. They didn't have to. The steadiness alone was devastating. The transformation on my parents' faces was instantaneous. My mother's frozen smile cracked first, sliding off her face in pieces. Her hand, still suspended midair, trembled slightly and fell against her dress. My father's confident posture faltered, his shoulders lowered by a fraction, his stance shifting just enough to reveal uncertainty. My mother began, but the word was weak, unformed. My wife lifted her hand, not aggressively, simply with elegance and finality, and the half-sentence died. "No," she said. "Just that. One syllable, soft but immovable. You'll listen first, then you can decide whether you want to come inside." The entire porch seemed to hold its breath. The sunlight stretched long shadows from the columns of our entryway, framing the scene like a cinematic reveal. The birds had gone quiet. Even the wind stilled. It was as though the world had paused to acknowledge this single, pivotal moment. And in that stillness, I looked at my wife. Really looked at her. The woman who chose me. The woman who loved me without conditions. The woman who stood here not just as my partner, but as my protector, my advocate, my shield, and my sword, a warrior queen in cream silk. And for the first time in my life, my parents were on the back foot, unsure, shaken, exposed. The balance of power had shifted, finally, unmistakably, and I realized something I'd never fully allowed myself to feel. They were no longer the people who defined my worth. My wife, and the life we'd built, had rewritten that definition entirely. Act 1. The wedding. They never showed up for. To understand what happened on our porch that day, you need to understand what happened 6 months earlier, on the day that was supposed to be the happiest, brightest, most unforgettable moment of my life. Instead, it became the day that taught me exactly what I meant to my parents. Not what they claimed I meant, not the roles they played for the world, but the truth. Our wedding morning began like something out of a magazine spread. The sky was a soft, endless blue. The lake beside the venue glowed like polished silver under the early June sun. The garden smelled of lavender and roses, flowers we'd chosen together months before, walking between the nursery rows and pointing at colors we liked. The chairs were arranged in perfect white rows, each one wiped clean by the staff, each ribbon tied with care. The aisle runner fluttered in the warm breeze. Everything felt intentional, crafted, warm, like the world was smiling at us. We had planned every detail, the music, the seating, the timing of the vows, the menu, the photographer's angles. And yes, we'd planned for my parents. They'd RSVP'd, yes. Not maybe, not we'll see, not depends on our schedule, yes. A definite, written, printed commitment. My mother had even asked about dress code. She'd sounded almost involved, curious, pleased. For a moment, I'd let myself imagine this time might be different. I'd reserved front row seats for them, right beside my wife's parents. I had placed little name cards, hand calligraphed by my wife's sister, who spent 2 evenings practicing the delicate lettering, on the seats. I'd imagined looking out during the ceremony and seeing my parents' faces mixed with the rest of the smiling crowd. I thought maybe they'd be proud, maybe they'd clap too loudly, maybe my mother would cry. Maybe my father would shake my hand too firmly afterward. Maybe this would be the milestone that finally mattered to them. But the morning arrived, and the signs started showing. My best man helped me with my tie while cracking jokes, but even he noticed how many times I checked my phone. I couldn't stop. My hands kept drifting toward it like it had a magnetic pull. Every time it buzzed, my heart leapt, but it was never them. An hour before the ceremony, I finally broke and called. My mother answered just before voicemail would have taken it. Her voice sounded far away. Not physically, but emotionally, like she'd already chosen something else over me. "Mom?" I said. "Just checking. You're on your way, right? The ceremony starts in an hour." There was silence on the line. Then the casual, careless words I'll never forget. "Oh, right. Your wedding." Your wedding. As if I had reminded her of an errand she'd forgotten to run. My stomach twisted. "Is everything okay?" I asked, though I already knew exactly where this was going. "We're not going to make it," she said with that airy, dismissive tone she used when talking about things she considered unimportant. "What? Why?" "We're too busy." Those 3 words landed heavier than the entire wedding arch. "Busy with what?" I asked, already bracing myself. "Your father has a golf tournament. He's been preparing for weeks. A golf tournament. A golf tournament. And I have my book club brunch. We already reserved the table. You know how hard it is to get a spot on Saturdays. A book club brunch. For my mother. A tee-off time for my father. Those outweighed my wedding. Please, I said, because pride wasn't as important as hope. Please come, even if you're late, even for a few minutes. My voice cracked. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't help it. My father grabbed the phone. I could hear the irritation before he spoke. "Stop being dramatic," he snapped. "We're not driving 3 hours for a tiny ceremony. You'll have other big events." But that was a lie. I knew it. He knew it. We both knew it. They'd missed my high school awards ceremony, my college graduation, my business launch, every milestone, every moment that wasn't about my older brother, the son they worshipped like he could do no wrong. "We'll send a gift," my mother added, as though a present could stand in for a parent. And then they hung up, just disconnected, went on with their day, left me standing in a groom's suite holding a phone like it was a piece of me that had just shattered. I kept the pain to myself until my wife reached me at the aisle. When she saw my face, the way it wasn't lighting up the way it should have, she squeezed my hands so tight I thought she might leave marks. "Their absence says nothing about you," she whispered. Only about them. But as I looked over her shoulder at those 2 empty reserved seats, I couldn't believe her yet. The guests saw, people whispered. My wife's parents gave each other bewildered looks, then angry ones. During the vows, I spoke on autopilot. I smiled where I was supposed to smile. I kissed her when the officiant said to. Everyone clapped. But those 2 seats stayed completely empty. Stark, accusing, a reminder that I wasn't worth the inconvenience of a drive. The reception was worse. There was supposed to be a mother-son dance. I had chosen a song. I had practiced not crying, but instead I stood off to the side watching my wife dance with her father. A moment full of joy and love, while mine were nowhere. My best man noticed. He put a hand on my shoulder and said quietly, "Come on, man, let's dance. They don't deserve to ruin this for you." He tried. He tried so hard, but the emptiness inside me was something no song could drown out. That night, in our hotel room, everything I'd been holding back collapsed. Still in my suit, tie undone, I broke. Not quiet tears, not acceptable movie scene crying. I sobbed, uglier than I'd ever cried in my life. "I'm so sorry," I choked out again and again. "I'm so sorry they embarrassed you, that they embarrassed us. I'm sorry I wasn't worth it." My wife grabbed my face in her hands, her eyes burning with fierce love. "Listen to me," she said, voice trembling with emotion. "You are worth everything. You are worth the world. They should be ashamed. They should be embarrassed. They missed the most beautiful moment of my life. That is their loss. But everyone saw that you rose anyway. Everyone saw the life you built. Everyone saw your strength." She wiped my tears away one by one, her hands gentle, steady. "And one day," she said softly, "they'll realize what they threw away. But by then, you'll be too far beyond them for it to matter." I wanted to believe her, but all I felt in that moment was emptiness. The next day, my mother texted, "How was the wedding? Send photos." No apology, no acknowledgement, nothing, just entitlement. And I finally did what I should have done years earlier. I didn't respond. 6 months passed. 6 months of silence. 6 months of building my life with my wife. 6 months of growing success, growing peace, growing distance from the people who never showed up. Then one afternoon, I posted a photo to Instagram, a candid shot of my wife's hand in mine, her ring catching sunlight, resting on the hood of my new $220,000 sports car. Hours later, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "We're visiting this weekend. Make sure you're home." No greeting, no explanation, no reconnecting, just expectation, just entitlement wrapped in faux urgency. And that single text was what brought them to our porch 6 months later, and what led my wife, the woman who had held me through my worst night, to meet them at the door like a queen guarding her kingdom. ACT 2. The Instagram Explosion. My wife wasn't big on social media. She had an Instagram account that she used sporadically, posting maybe once a month, usually just artistic shots of her coffee or books or the sunset. She had a few hundred followers, mostly friends and colleagues, and she never posted anything too personal, which is why I was surprised when she'd shown me the photo she wanted to post on a random Thursday afternoon. It was a picture of her hand, palm down, fingers slightly spread. The angle was artistic, catching the afternoon light streaming through our living room window, and prominently displayed on her ring finger was her engagement ring, the $25,000 custom piece I'd saved for 2 years to afford. The ring was spectacular. White gold band with a cushion-cut diamond in the center, surrounded by smaller diamonds in an intricate, vintage-inspired setting. It had belonged to my wife's grandmother originally, but the stone had been too small and the setting too damaged to wear. So I'd worked with a jeweler to redesign it completely, keeping the sentimental stone but creating something new and extraordinary around it. My wife had cried when I'd proposed with it, not just because it was beautiful, but because I'd taken something precious to her and made it even more meaningful. "Are you sure you want to post this?" I'd asked when she showed me the photo. "It's pretty prominent." She'd smiled, a strange little smile I couldn't quite read. "I think it's time people saw what you gave me, what you're capable of giving." I hadn't understood the significance of that statement then, but I would. She'd posted the photo with a simple caption. 6 months married to my best friend. Every day is a gift. The response had been immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, likes and comments had started pouring in. Friends congratulating her, coworkers asking about the ring, acquaintances she barely knew leaving comments about how beautiful it was. An hour after she'd posted, I'd been in my home office when her phone started buzzing on the kitchen counter. Again, and again, and again. Are you going to get that? I'd called out. No, she'd called back from the bedroom. Let it buzz. Curious, I'd walked over and glanced at her phone screen. 3 missed calls from a number she had saved as Do Not Answer. 5 text messages from the same number. I didn't recognize it immediately, but something about the persistence made my stomach clench. Who's Do Not Answer? I'd asked when she came into the kitchen. She'd looked at her phone screen and smiled that same strange smile. Your mother. My blood had run cold. What? Your mother has been trying to reach me for the past hour, ever since I posted the ring photo. How does she even have your number? She got it from your cousin, apparently. Sent me a friend request on Instagram last month. I declined it, but she must have seen the post anyway or had someone show it to her. I'd picked up her phone, and she'd nodded permission for me to read the messages. The first text, Who is this? How did you get that ring? The second, This is my name's mother. We need to talk. The third, Who bought you that ring? How much did it cost? The fourth, We want to meet you now. Today, tell us where you live. The fifth, Respond immediately. This is his mother. My hands had been shaking as I'd read them. The audacity, the entitlement, the complete lack of self-awareness. She didn't even ask how you were, I'd said quietly. Didn't apologize for missing the wedding. Didn't ask how I was, just demanded to know about the ring. I know, my wife had said, her voice calm but her eyes sharp. My phone had started ringing then, my father's name lighting up the screen. I'd answered on speaker, my wife beside me. Hello? Finally, my father's voice, gruff and impatient. We've been trying to reach your wife. Tell her to answer her phone. It's rude to ignore family. You're not her family, I'd said before I could stop myself. You didn't even come to our wedding. A pause. Then, that's in the past. We're calling about that ring. Your wife posted it on Instagram. Where did she get it? Who paid for it? I did, I'd said. I bought it for her. Another pause, longer this time. When my father spoke again, his tone had changed, become calculating. That's a very expensive ring. That's good, that's very good. Your wife obviously comes from money. What? Her family must be wealthy. That kind of ring, that kind of taste. Tell her we want to meet. Tonight, if possible. We need to get to know our daughter-in-law properly. The words had hit me like a slap. They didn't want to meet my wife because they cared about her, or about me. They wanted to meet her because they thought she, or her family, had money they could access. Tell her to dress properly, my father had continued. First impressions matter. We expect a certain standard. I'd been too stunned to respond. My wife had gently taken the phone from my hand. This is his wife, she'd said, her voice perfectly polite. And you can tell me yourself what you expect. I'm right here. My father had cleared his throat. Oh, well, good. As I was saying, we'd like to meet you. We're his parents, and it's inappropriate that we haven't met yet. You were invited to our wedding, my wife had said calmly. That would have been an excellent opportunity to meet. Yes, well, we were busy that day, but that's water under the bridge now. What matters is moving forward. We'd like to come visit. Tomorrow. What's your address? My wife had looked at me, and I'd seen something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Something fierce and protective and absolutely unafraid. Actually, she'd said, why don't you come this Saturday? 3 o'clock. I'll text you the address. Perfect, my father had said. Make sure you're presentable, and tell him to clean the house. We want to see how our son is living. And then he'd hung up. I'd stared at my wife, confused and concerned. Why did you invite them? Why would you want to see them after everything they've done? She'd taken my face in her hands, her expression softening. Because I want them to understand something. I want them to see exactly what they threw away, and I want them to know that I will never, ever let them hurt you again. What are you planning? You'll see, she'd said. Trust me. And even though I'd been terrified, I had trusted her. Because if there was one thing I'd learned in our year together, it was that my wife was brilliant, strategic, and fiercely protective of the people she loved, and I was about to discover just how far she was willing to go to protect me. Kyo 3. Preparing the stage. The 3 days between my father's call and Saturday afternoon had been strange. My wife had been calm, almost serene, while I'd been a bundle of nerves. She'd gone about her normal routine, work, coffee, reading in the evenings, while I'd paced and worried and tried to figure out what she was planning. On Friday evening, she'd started preparing. I need you to gather some things for me, she'd said, sitting at our dining room table with a notepad. What kind of things? Every text message, every email, every voicemail from your parents, especially anything from around the wedding. Screenshots of everything. Can you do that? I'd felt my chest tighten. Why? Because they're going to lie, she'd said simply. They're going to rewrite history and make excuses and try to manipulate both of us, and I need evidence to counter it. I'd spent 2 hours going through my phone, my email, my old messages. Each one I found had been like reopening a wound. The casual cruelty of my mother's texts, the dismissive tone of my father's emails, the voicemail from the morning of our wedding where my mother had said verbatim, "We're not coming, stop calling. You're being dramatic about a ceremony that doesn't matter." I'd saved them all in a folder, though reading through them had left me feeling sick and shaky. My wife had reviewed everything I'd sent her, her expression growing colder with each message she read. "They're worse than you described," she'd finally said. "I know." "No, I mean they're genuinely cruel. This isn't just neglect. This is active disdain." I'd nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. She'd stood up and wrapped her arms around me. "I'm so sorry you grew up with this. I'm so sorry you internalized the message that you weren't worth their time, because you are worth everything, and what they did to you is unforgivable." "So what are we going to do tomorrow?" She'd pulled back and looked at me with those fierce eyes again. "Tomorrow, we're going to give them exactly what they deserve, and you're going to watch me do it, okay?" "Okay." Saturday morning, my wife had woken up early. I'd found her in the dining room, arranging items on the table with careful precision. She'd printed out selected text messages and emails, each one on its own sheet of paper, organized in a black leather folder. She'd pulled out our wedding album and placed it in the center of the table, open to a page showing the empty chairs where my parents should have been sitting. She'd arranged financial documents nearby, not everything, but enough to show that we were doing well for ourselves. My business quarterly reports, her salary statements, investment portfolios. "What are you doing?" I'd asked, watching her work. "Setting the stage," she'd said. "When they come, they're going to make assumptions. I want them to see just enough to confirm their worst biases before I dismantle them." She'd placed the folder of printed messages right next to her seat at the table, prominent, deliberate. "When they arrive," she'd said, "I need you to let me take the lead. Don't speak unless I specifically ask you to. Can you do that?" "I don't understand what you're planning." "You will. Just trust me, and remember, you don't owe them anything. Not your time, not your energy, and certainly not access to our life." We'd spent the rest of the morning in relative quiet, both of us feeling the weight of what was coming. I'd tried to read, to work, to distract myself, but nothing had helped. The clock had seemed to crawl toward 3 o'clock. At 2:30, my wife had gone upstairs to change. She'd come down 15 minutes later looking elegant and composed in her cream blouse and tailored pants, her grandmother's ring catching the light, her hair perfect, her expression serene. "You look beautiful," I'd said. "I look expensive," she'd corrected with a slight smile. "There's a difference, and right now, I need to look expensive." "Why?" "Because they need to see what they think they're getting access to before I take it away." At 2:55, she'd positioned herself in the living room where she'd have a clear view of the front door. I'd stood in the hallway, my heart racing, watching her and waiting. At exactly 3 o'clock, the knock had come. My wife had looked at me one last time. "Ready?" I'd nodded, even though I wasn't, and then she'd walked to the door, opened it, and delivered the first blow of what would become the most devastating confrontation of my parents' lives. ACT 4. The confrontation. After my wife's opening statement, the one that had made my parents' smiles collapse, the silence on our porch had been absolute. My mother's hand was still frozen mid-air, her expression shifting rapidly between confusion, offense, and something that might have been fear. My father had drawn himself up to his full height, trying to regain the authority he clearly felt entitled to. "I beg your pardon?" my mother finally managed, her voice tight. My wife hadn't moved. She remained in the doorway, serene and immovable, her voice perfectly calm when she spoke again. "I said, before you come into our home, you need to understand that I know exactly who you are, what you've done, and why you're here. And if you step through this door, you'll be held accountable for all of it." "This is outrageous," my father said. "We're his parents. We don't need to be interrogated to visit our own son." "He's not your son when it's convenient," my wife replied. "He's your son all the time, even when you chose a golf tournament over his wedding." My mother's face flushed. "You don't know what you're talking about. We had obligations." "You had choices," my wife corrected. "You chose a book club brunch over your son's wedding. Those were your priorities. Your choices. Don't dress them up as obligations." I stood in the hallway, transfixed. I'd never seen anyone speak to my parents this way. My entire life, they'd controlled every conversation, steamrolled over every objection, dismissed every hurt feeling with practiced ease, and here was my wife, 5'5" and serene as a Buddha, stopping them in their tracks with nothing but calm, clear truth. We sent a gift, my mother tried. You sent a card with $100 check, my wife said, 3 weeks after the wedding, with a note that said, "Congratulations on the ceremony." The ceremony, not your marriage, not your special day, just the ceremony, as if it were something clinical and impersonal. "How do you—" my father started, then stopped, realization dawning. "You've been talking to him about us, poisoning him against his own family." "I didn't have to poison anything," my wife said. "Your actions spoke for themselves. He told me everything, years before we got married, because when you truly know someone, you know their wounds, and he's been wounded by you his entire life." My mother's eyes darted past my wife to where I stood in the hallway. "Honey," she said, her voice shifting to something softer, more manipulative. "Are you going to let her speak to us this way? We're your parents. Tell her she's out of line." All eyes turned to me. My wife glanced back, her expression neutral, giving me the space to respond or stay silent. My choice. I thought about all the times I'd defended them, all the times I'd made excuses for their absence, their cruelty, their blatant favoritism toward my brother, all the times I'd swallowed my hurt and pretended everything was fine because it was easier than confronting them. "She's not out of line," I said quietly. "She's right. About all of it." My mother's face crumpled in theatrical hurt. "How can you say that? After everything we've done for you." "Like what?" The question came out sharper than I'd intended. "Name one thing you've done for me in the past 5 years, and one phone call where you asked about my life. One visit where you actually wanted to see me, not just assess what I had. One moment where I felt like I mattered to you." "We're here now," my father said. "You're here because of this," my wife said, raising her left hand so the ring caught the light. "You're here because you saw evidence of money and wanted access to it, not because you care about your son or about repairing the relationship you destroyed." "That's not true," my mother protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "We wanted to meet you, to welcome you to the family properly." "Really?" My wife's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "So it's just coincidence that in 6 months of marriage, you never once asked to meet me until I posted a photo of an expensive ring?" Silence. "That's what I thought," my wife said. "So here's what's going to happen. You can come inside, you can sit down, and we can have an honest conversation about why you're really here and what you really want. But if you lie, if you manipulate, if you try to gaslight either of us, this meeting ends immediately. Are we clear?" My parents exchanged glances, some wordless communication passing between them. I could see them recalibrating, trying to figure out how to navigate this unexpected resistance. "Fine," my father finally said. "We'll come in." My wife stepped aside, allowing them entry. They walked past her into our home, and I watched them take in everything with assessing eyes. The furniture we'd carefully chosen, the art on the walls, the financial documents visible on the dining room table. My mother's gaze lingered on those documents, and I saw the moment she calculated what they might mean. "Nice place," my father said, his tone suggesting it was adequate but not impressive by his standards. "Thank you," my wife replied. "We've worked hard for it." We moved into the living room. My wife gestured to the couch for my parents and took the armchair positioned across from them. I sat on the ottoman next to her, feeling like a child watching adults negotiate, except this time the adult on my side was fighting for me instead of against me. My mother settled onto the couch, immediately reaching for my wife's hand again. "Let me see that ring properly." My wife extended her hand, and my mother grabbed it, pulling it close to examine the ring. Her eyes widened as she took in the quality of the stone, the intricate setting, the obvious expense. "This is real," she breathed. It wasn't a question. "Very real," my wife confirmed, "and very special. It was my grandmother's stone, completely redesigned by your son." My mother's head snapped up. "He designed this?" "He worked with a jeweler for months," my wife said. "Took something precious to me and made it even more meaningful. That's the kind of man he is. Thoughtful, generous, creative. But you wouldn't know that, would you?" The barb landed. My mother released my wife's hand and sat back, her expression pinched. My father leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression one of forced friendliness. "Well, this is all very impressive. You've obviously done well for yourselves. Your family must be proud." "They are," my wife said. "They came to our wedding. Both of them. My mother cried during the vows. My father gave a speech at the reception about how lucky he was to gain a son. They visited us 3 times since we got married, always asking if the timing works for us first, always bringing gifts, always staying in a hotel so we have our space. Each statement was a knife, carefully placed. My parents' faces grew more uncomfortable with each comparison. We wanted to be there, my mother tried again. But circumstances? Stop, my wife said, raising one hand. Just stop. You're about to lie, and I told you that if you lied, this meeting would end. Ooh, I'm not. My wife reached for the black folder on the side table next to her chair. She opened it, pulling out the first printed page. This is a text message you sent your son the morning of our wedding, she said, holding it up. Would you like me to read it out loud, or would you like to tell the truth about why you didn't come? My mother's face went pale. She stared at the paper like it was a snake. How did you? My father started. Your son saved everything, my wife said simply. Every text, every email, every voicemail, every casual cruelty you delivered thinking there would never be consequences. She set the first page down and pulled out another. This one is from 3 weeks before the wedding. You told him his marriage wouldn't last 6 months and that you wouldn't waste money on a dress for a ceremony that didn't matter. I didn't mean, my mother whispered. This one, my wife continued, pulling out another sheet, is from his college graduation, which you also didn't attend. You told him he was being dramatic and needy for wanting you there. She kept pulling pages, one after another, a documentation of years of neglect and dismissal and outright cruelty. Should I continue? My wife asked. Because I have 3 more years worth here. Every time you forgot his birthday. Every time you canceled plans at the last minute. Every comparison to his brother where he came up short. Every accomplishment you dismissed. All of it, saved and documented. My father's face had gone from pale to red. You had no right. I had every right, my wife said, her voice still calm but carrying an edge now. He's my husband. When you hurt him, you hurt me. And I don't allow people in my home who only show up when they smell money. The room fell silent. That word, money, hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. My mother recovered first, drawing herself up with wounded dignity. That's not why we're here, isn't it? My wife pulled out her phone, scrolling for a moment before turning the screen toward my mother. This is the Instagram post that prompted your first message to me. I posted it 6 hours ago. Within 1 hour, you'd found my number, called me 3 times, and sent 5 text messages demanding to know who bought the ring and insisting on meeting me immediately. My mother didn't look at the phone. We were concerned. About what? About your son spending money on his wife? Or about the fact that the amount of money involved suggested we might have resources you could access? That's, my father tried. True, my wife finished. Here's what I know. You didn't care when he bought his first house. You didn't care when his business started turning a profit. You didn't care when he got a promotion. But a $25,000 ring? That got your attention? Not because you were happy for him, but because you calculated what it might mean for you. ACT 5. The reveal. My mother's hands were shaking now, her carefully maintained composure cracking. You weren't supposed to see those messages. The admission hung in the air, damning in its honesty. My wife leaned forward slightly, and I saw the predator beneath the serene surface. So you admit you said those things? My wife said. Not a question. A statement. My mother looked at my father, desperate for help. He was staring at the folder of printed messages like it might spontaneously combust if he glared hard enough. Let me tell you what I saw, my wife continued. She opened the folder to a page she'd marked with a sticky note. This text was sent the day after we got engaged, from your phone to his brother's phone. Your son forwarded it to me because he wanted me to know what I was getting into. She read aloud. He's marrying some girl we've never met, probably beneath us. Don't expect an invitation to anything fancy. My mother's face crumpled. I was upset. I just found out from someone else instead of from him directly. He called you the day we got engaged, I said, speaking for the first time since they'd sat down. You didn't answer. He left a voicemail. You never called back. I was busy. You're always busy, I said. Too busy for my graduation. Too busy for my wedding. Too busy to return a call about my engagement. But never too busy to talk about my brother for hours. Never too busy to fly across the country for his work events. Never too busy to post about him on social media. My wife pulled out her own phone again, opening Facebook. This is your public page, she said, turning it toward my mother. I looked through your posts going back 5 years. You've mentioned your older son 147 times. Birthdays, accomplishments, random thoughts about how proud you are. Want to know how many times you've mentioned your younger son? Silence. 7 times, my wife answered. 3 of those were generic group posts about being blessed with family. One was when he bought his first house, and your comment was, nice to see him being responsible for once. The other 3 were anniversary posts where you listed family accomplishments and included his name in passing. She set her phone down and looked directly at my mother. So when you say we're overreacting, when you say you care, when you say you wanted to be there, the evidence says otherwise. My father cleared his throat. Every family has its dynamics. He was always more independent. His brother needed more support. His brother needed more attention, my wife corrected. There's a difference. And your younger son learned that his needs didn't matter, so he stopped expressing them. That's not independence. That's survival. She pulled out another document from the folder. This one I hadn't seen before. Your son has been in therapy for the past 3 years, my wife said, working through the trauma of growing up feeling invisible. Do you know what his therapist calls what you did to him? Emotional neglect. Not abuse, because you provided material necessities, but neglect, because you withheld the emotional support and validation every child needs. My mother's tears were real now, streaming down her face and ruining her carefully applied makeup. But whether she was crying from guilt or from being caught, I couldn't tell. We did our best, she whispered. Your best wasn't good enough, my wife said, echoing the words I'd said to them months ago. And now you want to waltz back into his life, into our lives, because you think we have something you can benefit from. That's not, my father started, but my wife cut him off with a look. Your son told me everything you've done before we ever married, she said. He was honest about his family, about the neglect, about the favoritism, about the pain, and do you know what my response was? She reached over and took my hand, squeezing it gently. I told him that his parents' failure to see his worth said nothing about him and everything about them, that anyone who couldn't recognize how extraordinary he is didn't deserve access to his life, and I promised him that if they ever tried to hurt him again, I would protect him. She stood up then, still holding my hand, her presence seeming to fill the entire room. So here we are. You've come to our home not out of love or genuine desire for reconciliation, but because you saw evidence of money and wanted a piece of it. You've sat in our living room and lied repeatedly, even when confronted with evidence of your own cruelty. You've made excuses instead of apologies. You've justified instead of taking accountability. My wife walked to the front door and opened it wide, afternoon sunlight streaming in. I don't allow people in my home who only show up when they smell money, she said, her voice clear and final. And I certainly don't allow people who have spent years breaking my husband's heart to suddenly waltz back in, because it's convenient for them. My parents sat frozen on the couch, staring at her in disbelief. You're kicking us out? My mother asked, her voice small. I'm showing you the door, my wife corrected. What you do with that information is up to you. HRT 6. The final blow. For a moment, no one moved. My parents sat on our couch looking shell-shocked. My wife stood by the open door looking like an avenging angel, and I remained on the ottoman, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of terror and awe. Then my mother started crying in earnest. Not the manipulative tears she'd used earlier, but deep, ugly sobs that shook her shoulders. We're family, she gasped between sobs. You can't just... We're family. Family shows up, my wife said, unmoved. You didn't. My father stood up, his face red with anger and humiliation. You have no right to speak to us this way. We're his parents. We raised him. You gave birth to him, my wife corrected. You provided the legal minimum of care. That doesn't make you parents in any meaningful sense. That makes you people who were obligated to keep a child alive until he could escape. How dare you? My father started, moving toward my wife with his finger raised. I stood up so fast the ottoman toppled over. Oh, don't, I said, my voice sharp. Don't you dare move toward her like that. My father stopped, looking at me with something like surprise. I'd never stood up to him before, never raised my voice, never defended myself or anyone else against his anger. But he wasn't going to intimidate my wife, not in our home, not ever. Sit down, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Or leave. Those are your options. My father's jaw worked, fury and shock warring on his face. But he sat, perhaps recognizing that he'd lost control of the situation entirely. My mother was still crying. We wanted to be there, she said, her voice breaking. We did. We thought it wouldn't matter as much to you. You've always been so independent. That's not an excuse, I said quietly. That's never been an excuse. I was independent because I had no choice. Because every time I needed you, you weren't there, so I learned not to need you. We can change, my father said, but the words sounded hollow. We can do better. Just give us another chance. My wife laughed, a sound without humor. Another chance? You've had thousands of chances. Every missed birthday was a chance to show up the next year. Every canceled plan was a chance to follow through the next time. Every dismissive comment was a chance to offer encouragement instead. You've had his entire life to do better, and you consistently chose not to. She walked back toward them, and despite herself, my mother flinched, but my wife just picked up the folder of printed messages. I'm going to tell you exactly why you're here, she said, and I want you to be honest, at least with yourselves, about whether I'm right. She flipped through the pages, pulling out specific ones. You saw the ring. You calculated its value. You realized your son had more money than you thought, and suddenly you wanted a relationship. She held up a message. Here's a text from 8 months ago where you asked your son to co-sign a loan. He said no. You didn't speak to him for 2 months after that. I'd forgotten about that. Or maybe I'd tried to forget about it. The loan had been for my brother, who'd gotten into financial trouble again and needed their help. They'd asked me to help them help him, and when I'd refused, they'd gone silent. Here's an email from a year ago asking if he could introduce you to one of his wealthy clients for networking purposes. My wife's voice dripped disdain. He politely declined. You called him selfish. More forgotten memories suddenly brought into sharp focus. So when you saw the ring, you didn't see your son being generous to his wife. You saw an opportunity. Money you might be able to access, connections you might be able to exploit, resources you might be able to tap. That's not... My father tried, but his protest was weak. It is, my wife said simply. That's exactly what this is. And the truly sad thing is that if you'd actually cared about your son, if you'd built a real relationship with him, he probably would have helped you when you needed it, because despite everything you've done, he's a good person, generous, kind, willing to forgive. She looked at me then, her eyes soft. But I'm not. She turned back to my parents, and her expression hardened again. You've spent your lives breaking him down, making him feel worthless, prioritizing his brother, dismissing his achievements, and when he finally built something beautiful, a marriage, a life, a sense of self-worth, you showed up not to celebrate, but to take. My mother had stopped crying, her face blotchy and her makeup ruined. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Are you? My wife asked. Are you sorry for what you did, or are you sorry you got caught? Are you sorry you hurt him, or are you sorry the hurt has consequences? My mother didn't answer. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. Honey, please, you can't let her do this. We're your parents. Something in me snapped, not with anger, but with clarity. You're right, I said quietly. You are my parents, biologically, legally, but you've never been my family, not in any way that matters. That's not true, my father said. We love you. No, I said. You love the idea of me. You love being able to say you have 2 sons, you love the optics of a complete family, but you don't love me, you don't even know me, you've never bothered to learn who I am, what I care about, what matters to me. I walked over to where my wife stood, taking her hand. This, I said, gesturing to her, is what love looks like. She knows my favorite coffee order. She knows I stress clean when I'm anxious. She knows I save every voicemail from people I care about because I'm afraid of forgetting their voices. She knows me, and she chose to be here. Every day, she chooses to be here. I looked back at my parents, sitting on our couch in their expensive clothes, looking lost and confused. You chose not to be here, I continued. For my entire life, you chose not to be here. And now that there's something in it for you, you want back in. But that's not how it works. That's not how any of this works. My wife squeezed my hand, her support giving me strength. You can leave now, I said, and you don't have to come back. In fact, I'd prefer if you didn't. Not until you can honestly look at what you've done and take accountability for it. Not, I'm sorry you felt hurt. Not, we did our best. Not, every family has its dynamics. But genuine acknowledgement of the specific ways you failed me and genuine commitment to change. And even then, my wife added, it would be his choice whether to let you back in. Not mine, not yours. His choice, because this is his life, and he gets to decide who has access to it. My father stood up slowly, pulling my still crying mother up with him. They looked defeated, smaller than they'd seemed when they'd arrived with their practiced smiles and designer clothes. You'll regret this, my father said, but there was no conviction in his voice, just emptiness. Maybe, I said, but I don't think so. I think I'll regret wasting years trying to earn love from people who weren't capable of giving it. But setting boundaries, protecting myself, protecting my wife, I don't think I'll regret that. They walked to the door, my mother stumbling slightly, my father's hand on her elbow steadying her. At the threshold, my mother turned back one last time. "The ring really is beautiful," she said softly. "He did a good job." For the first time since they'd arrived, my wife smiled. "He did, because he pays attention, because he cares, because he's an extraordinary person who deserves to be seen and valued." She paused, then added, "That's what you missed. Not just a wedding or a graduation or a milestone. You missed him. All of him. And that's a loss you'll carry for the rest of your lives." My parents left. The door closed behind them, and for a long moment, my wife and I just stood there, holding hands, listening to their car start and pull away. Then I was crying, deep shaking sobs that I couldn't control. All the years of hurt, all the rejection, all the hope that had been crushed again and again, it all came pouring out. My wife held me, her arms strong and sure, her voice steady in my ear. "You're safe now," she whispered. "They can't hurt you anymore. I won't let them." "Thank you," I managed between sobs. "Thank you for protecting me." "Always," she said fiercely. "I will always protect you. That's what love does." Later, after I'd cried myself out, after we'd made tea and curled up on the couch together, my wife's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my mother, a long, rambling message about how they were hurt and confused, about how they'd only wanted to help, about how family should forgive. My wife showed me the message, her finger hovering over the delete button. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. I thought about it, about all the messages I'd received over the years, all the half-apologies and manipulations and guilt trips. "Block the number," I said. She did, without hesitation. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" I asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Some people never do. Some people are so invested in their own narrative that they can't see the truth even when it's staring them in the face. So what do? We live our lives," she said simply. "We build our family, the family we choose. We set boundaries and protect them. We refuse to accept less than we deserve, and we remember that their failure to see your worth was never about you. It was always about them." I leaned against her, feeling more at peace than I had in years. "I love you," I said. "I love you too," she replied. "And unlike them, I show up. I'll always show up." And she did. Every day after that, she showed up. My parents never came back, never apologized in any meaningful way. Eventually, they stopped trying to contact me altogether, and you know what? I was okay with that. Because I'd finally learned what I should have known all along, that I deserved better, that I was worth more than crumbs of affection and conditional love. That family wasn't defined by biology, but by choice, by presence, by love freely given. I'd married someone who saw me, who valued me, who fought for me when I'd spent so long not fighting for myself. And that ring that had started it all, the one that had brought my parents crawling back with their transparent motives and hollow smiles, it wasn't just a beautiful piece of jewelry. It was a symbol, a reminder that I'd taken something precious and made it even more meaningful, that I was capable of generosity and thoughtfulness and love, that I was, despite what my parents had always made me feel, enough, more than enough, and I finally believed it.